Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, and boy, do we have a great show for you today talking Dynasty Sleepers. I've got a couple of guests here that you're going to really want to hear what they have to say. First, we've got Kelly Singh, Kelly in Phoenix on Twitter or X or whatever we call it now. Kelly, thank you for being here. Tell everybody, kind of what you've been working on and where they can find your work.
Yeah. Basically, if you're following me there over on the app formerly known as Twitter, you'll be caught up on everything. But I am a writer over at Player Profiler. You can find me there. Club Fantasy, Women of Fantasy Football, Dynasty Pros, and VP of Marketing at Trophy Smack.
That, and you see if you're watching here on YouTube, there's some Bird Gang gear in the background, and we are going to talk some Arizona Cardinals dynasty values because I really think, like, no lie, that they are one of the more interesting teams when it comes to dynasty values right now between Kyler Murray and Trey McBride, and of course everyone's top 10 wide receiver Marvin Harrison. Everyone's number one fantasy analyst Theo Gremminger is also here at the OG Fantasy. Theo, welcome back to the show.
Excited to be here, Heath. Did you mean top 5 wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr.?
I don't think he's everyone's top 5. There are a few people that might have Garrett Wilson ahead of him, or a few people might have Puka Nacua after what he did ahead of him. He might be everyone's top 5 by like September 15th. Yeah. I have a feeling he is going to hit the ground running, and we're going to try to do the same here today. On today's show, we are talking Dynasty Sleepers. We're going to talk about some rookies, our favorite rookies outside of the top 30, our favorite veterans that you could maybe trade one of those round 3 picks for to try to compete. But we always start with 3 questions for our guest, and we've asked Theo the 3 questions before. So Kelly is going to be put in the hot seat here, and Theo is one of the people that ruined this first question for you, I believe. But you're starting a new dynasty league. What is the one non-negotiable rule or setting? And you can't say Superflex because too many people said that in the past.
I will not say Superflex. I will say tight end premium, because I don't want people sandbagging on the tight end position. Let's put some people on the hot seat themselves, make them manage the tight end position.
No, I you know what? That has, since I banned Superflex from the answers, tight end premium has become probably our most common response. And Theo, I want to ask you about that, because the other thing that I hear on the opposite side is that, like, we're entering the golden age of tight ends. People see what Trey McBride and Sam Laporta did last year. They think Kyle Pitts has finally got a quarterback, and Brock Bowers is going to be elite right off the bat. We've still got Kelsey and Andrews. Is tight end like really turning, or are we going to get the fooled you once again? Because I've heard this song before.
I actually think it is turning. And I think if you're, you mentioned sort of these tight end sort of archetypes that have emerged, where in the past, sometimes the truly dominant tight end was the, incredible physical specimen, the huge tight end, a Jimmy Graham, a Rob Gronkowski. Those guys just don't grow on trees. But this new kind of archetype where you have the 6'4", 245-pound guy, these are like overgrown wide receivers. I think it's much easier to kind of find this sort of archetype, the mismatch that you can move all over the field, less reliant on as a blocker than in years past. And, I think you're seeing it. The Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram, all sort of in that size of player. And then this year we get Brock Bowers, who, like, if you squint and look at him across the field, it's like Jordy Nelson size guy. Like, he's not very big, but I think he's going to be incredible. And if you want to go really conspiracy theory, Heath, when you look at the wide getting, then the conspiracy theorist in me thinks I should build an offense where the tight end is featured, try to get these guys, because I'm never really going to have to pay them the same way.
Very, very good stuff. So we got to get right to the Cardinals here, Kelly. I think I see Kyler Murray over your right shoulder. He kind of roller coaster in terms of his dynasty value over the last couple of seasons. There was a time when he was an easy top 5 dynasty quarterback, fell out of a lot of people's top 12s during the ACL injury and recovery. But now he's got Trey McBride. He's got Marvin Harrison. What is the upside for Kyler Murray in 2024 and beyond?
The ceiling for Kyler Murray is to the moon. I know I'm going to sound like a huge homer here, but if you paid any attention last season, the way the Cardinals ended the season, it was on a huge upwards trajectory without even having all of the tools that he's going to have in his pocket this season. So I'm starting to hear, even on national television broadcasts, analysts are taking another look at the Cardinals. I think some teams are starting to be a little bit nervous going up against the Cardinals this season, and we love to see it.
Okay, so Theo, I have had Kyler Murray as one of my favorite dynasty buys for most of the offseason. He was living around that QB 10 to 12 range. He's my QB 8, just ahead of Justin Herbert, still ahead of the rookies. Am I too high on Kyler, or are you kind of buying what Kelly's saying here?
No, I think Kyler's in that tier if you're in a dynasty startup of really, really appealing quarterbacks, sort of right outside of the tremendous ones that cost you a fortune. Kyler has very, very improved weapons all around him. Even when you go past Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, they added Trey Benson, which is going to provide speed and explosiveness out of the backfield. Michael Wilson is in year 2. They go and get Zay Jones. And then we have year 2 of this regime in Arizona, where a lot of times we see, everybody a little more comfortable in year 2 with what they want to do. Kyler looked like he didn't miss a beat. He's always been one of the most productive quarterbacks when he's on the field. The only issue would be injuries, but anybody can get injured. So I'm sort of on the Kyler's a really, really good target, sort of in early redraft and in best ball values. And you've seen him fall into a range in dynasty startups where you can kind of maneuver around and get Kyler. Occasionally in a super flex startup, you can get him in like the early second round, whereas in years past, you're having to use top 5 overall pick on him in a super flex startup. So I think Kyler is in a really good place right now in all formats as a target. Really good upside, and sort of his downside, Heath. We've never seen the guy have a poor fantasy season in terms of points per game. So
Right.
I think he's got a really nice floor as well, where you're not really going to lose out on making a bet on Kyler.
The guys that I really struggle with are Kyler versus Anthony Richardson, Kyler versus Joe Burrow, because I do think there might be a little more upside there for Richardson. It's hard to say there's any more floor for Burrow, though. You make a good point. Like, we worry about Kyler's injury with his size and his running, but few quarterbacks have had the injury concerns that Joe Burrow's had so far in the NFL. Kelly, Theo brought up Trey Benson there. I think we're going to talk about later in the show some veterans that you might be able to buy for a third-round rookie pick. And if somebody's rebuilding, James Conner might be on that list. Just at his age, and with everyone expecting that Sermon's going to kind of take the job sometime in the next 12 months. What do you think that, and there haven't been, like, listen, James Conner's played more than 13 games, I think twice in his entire career. But if James Conner and Trey Sermon both stay healthy, Trey Benson, I did it again, this season, what do you think that split looks like between them?
I think it's going to look a lot like what we saw from the Lions with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. You've got James Conner, who typically ends up being those early downs. And also he's a pass catcher. So I think that's something that we don't necessarily see in Trey Benson, or haven't necessarily seen Trey Benson be, at least what I've been looking at. So we have that, a little bit of that give and take from the two of them. So I see a lot like the Lions. We're going to see James Conner early in the season, a lot more, I think, of Trey Benson later in the season, or if it continues to be a split, early game, late game. But we're going to see both of them together getting a lot of targets, and Trey Benson learning a lot from James Conner. We did see this with James Conner becoming injured, a brief moment with Amari DeMarcado from the Cardinals coming up. So I think James Conner is capable of bringing up that new running back as well.
I think one of the really interesting things, Theo, with these running backs, because Kelly mentioned it, a couple of years ago, James Conner was making plays in the passing game, just reminding everyone how good he actually is at that. But we saw last year his targets really dropped below 3 targets per game. And from what I watched, and I watched a lot of Trey McBride film, I'm a huge Trey McBride guy. This offense, and you hear people talking about it with Alex Van Pelt and the Patriots, they're going to do it this year too. A lot of tight end screens, a lot of the dump offs when the quarterback couldn't find anybody downfield. For most teams, those are going to running backs. For the Cardinals, it seems like they were going to Trey McBride last year. Do you think that there's going to be a little bit of headbutting there between the tight ends and the running backs in terms of target share?
I mean, that's a really good point, and I haven't really thought of that one. But yeah, I think sort of the manufactured touches around the line of scrimmage, that's something where you want to get Trey McBride the ball and get him early opportunities. And you've seen certain matchups last year where, McBride was the guy they went to just continually, double-digit targets. I think, when it comes down to it with Connor, it's just for me, he's 29 years old. He plays 13 games every single season. And I think it's a little bit of recency bias where last year he had his most efficient running season in quite some time and the most productive one where he had over 1,000 rushing yards. The 2 previous seasons, like you said, he caught 46 balls in 2022, but he was like a 700 yard rusher. Benson's different. I think Kelly just laid out like the bull case where this is a guy who the market is not really treating him like a potential Jahmyr Gibbs, potential Devon A-Chain type talent. But I think his explosiveness is underrated. This is a guy with incredible speed score, sub 4.4 speed despite his size. And I think that there's no way that you can kind of get around not trying to work him into the offense early on. I think it'll be like a handcuff plus situation. But any game that James Conner misses in redraft, I think we'll find ourselves ranking Trey Benson as an RB1. So I think Benson has the contingent upside and also a guy who's just going to go through the roof value-wise heading into 2025 when they potentially, move on from Connor. There's a chance that I think if Benson is as good as we think he is, when we're drafting in early best balls and in redrafts in 2025, Benson might be like a top 15 pick if this offense is transcendent and he's, a high-value touch guy in one of the league's best offenses. So I'm all over Trey Benson. At the end of the day, we don't want to bet on these 29-year-old running backs, especially ones who miss time every year.
So Trey Benson might actually be a redraft sleeper this year based on where he's being drafted. He's not a dynasty sleeper, though, obviously, because he's going to be a late first, early second round pick in most rookie drafts. We are going to talk dynasty sleepers, specifically rookies, right after the break.
It's the NWSL on CBS Sports Network.
Keep your eyes on me.
Let's find some rookie sleepers, and no pressure on you guys, but like there were people talking about Puka Nacua on this show last year. So if we could just, find a sleeper like that, that'd be fantastic. In all honesty, we've all agreed there's probably not going to be a Puka Nacua for the next decade that's drafted in round 3 and wins you a league as a rookie. So we'll set our bar just a little bit lower. We are looking for rookies who are outside of the top 30. And I told these guys, like, you define that however you want. Consensus rankings, rookie ADP, however. Kelly, we're going to start with you. Who's your favorite rookie sleeper?
I'm really looking at Benson. Surprise, tight end. I think there's a lot of potential that's going to be happening over there with the Commanders. Yeah, I love this one. And I know a lot of people are talking about Benson right now, especially how to pronounce his name, which I happened to look up before I came on this show. But similarly to the Cardinals, I think that the Commanders are in a position where the Cardinals almost were last year. So there's just a lot of room to grow there. And he's one that I'm definitely keeping an eye on over at the Commanders.
Well, and another similarity is like Trey McBride, he's probably going to begin this year learning from Zach Ertz and waiting for Zach Ertz to ride off into the sunset so he can have a bigger role. I think, Theo, a lot of people, when they look at Benson's counting stats, 49 catches, 676 yards, 6 receiving touchdowns in his final year at Kansas State, there might be a little bit of a yawn there, but you put those in the context of Kansas State's offense, And all of a sudden, he looks a lot more impressive as a prospect, right?
Yeah, and he led them in receiving yardage, and he led them in, I believe, touchdown catches. And they didn't use him like some mauler. Again, he sort of fits in the archetype like what we talked about earlier, where he's athletically gifted. He was towards the leaders among all tight ends at the combine in a number of categories, vertical leap. It was really, really impressive. Ran faster than Jatavian Sanders, sort of had a little bit of steam there. And then he was the first offensive player selected by Washington, after they made this franchise-changing decision with Jaden Daniels. And I think it was interesting because they took him in the second round, and they took him, way ahead of where other tight ends were going. So I think Ben Sinnott is a really, really good prospect. I think that he steamed up in tight end premium formats, but if your league is slow on him, I think he's a guy that could be a real steal and a guy who could gain a ton of dynasty value this season for sure.
And we will talk a little bit more about the other tight ends. I think the tight ends outside of Brock Bowers, there's several that are pretty interesting in this class. But Theo, when you look at rookie drafts, who's your favorite value outside of the top 30?
So for a little while, it was Jermaine Burton, but he steamed up big time. So you're not getting him in that range. I think it's interesting. There's a sort of a nobody wants to draft New England Patriots mentality when it comes to best ball, when it comes to redraft, and certainly when it comes to dynasty rookie drafts. There's also a Jalen Polk and Javon Baker sort of keeping each other's values down. There's sort of big camps for both of them. Where, some people will say that Javon Baker is a much better fantasy prospect, and we can't really look at the fact that Polk was 2 rounds ahead because it's the Patriots and they've been kind of poor in their evaluation process at the wideout position. I do think that Jalen Polk, though, he's slid down in some rookie drafts, and he was a top 40 pick. This is a guy who had a very strong profile at Washington. They took him ahead of Adonai Mitchell. They had an opportunity to take Ladd McConkey. They had an opportunity to take Keon Coleman. They didn't. They were very comfortable with Polk. So he might be a little bit ahead of pick 30, but he's sort of in that wheelhouse, Heath, where you can kind of maneuver around a rookie draft and have access to a second round NFL draft pick wide receiver that does have an opportunity to lead his team in targets. Not sure what percentage I would put on that, but I think Jalen Polk does have a chance to lead his team in targets. And then if you miss out on him, take a shot on Javon Baker, because I think that this team is committed to Drake May. They drafted both of these players. I think they have expectations for both of them. And because there's not a whole lot of wide receiver competition on New England, Demario Douglas doesn't really affect either of those guys. But I think those two guys both have a chance to establish themselves as an outside wide receiver there. And then I'll also add in, I think you're we talked about for months, Heath, when you came on Dynasty Life, and I believe when I came here in the lead-up process to the NFL draft, Malachi Corley was the guy we were super bullish on. Malachi Corley, there's a wide range of where he goes now. And some rookie drafts, you'll get somebody like Heath, who's I'm taking him in the end of the second round. Then there's some rookie drafts where people view him as this specialist, this Swiss Army knife type, where they view him as a guy that they'll let fall. I've seen him go in very weird spots in some leagues. So I think if he falls out of the top 30, there's a chance that he's really good really quickly on the Jets. I think he could fill right in to the wide receiver 2 spot. We already see that Mike Williams is banged up. So Malachi Corley is definitely one that, depending on your league, you might get really, really cheap.
Kelly, it is kind of it's one of those tests where when you look at Malachi Corley, do you see Deebo Samuel or do you see Laviska Shenault? And I just broke my own rule. We don't say Laviska Shenault's name on the show anymore. But another guy you might see, just a little bit smaller, who just left your Arizona Cardinals, Rondale Moore. That type of skill set where we're going to get this guy involved in the running game. He's so good after the catch, but we don't know if he can actually do anything beating people in coverage. I fall for those kind of guys.
Me too.
Yeah, so you're still in on Rondale Moore going to the Atlanta Falcons, then, what you're telling us.
But I think Rondale Moore absolutely still has a chance to make a breakthrough there. He just needs the right landing spot. That guy, he's got some talent. Mighty Moore.
Heath, you make a bull case for Malachi Corley, though. You're saying if we get Rondale Moore in a 5'10", 215-pound
Right.
size person. That's exciting. And
It is.
you can lean on that a little more. And I think the other thing people don't understand is you always make this reference about like Malachi Corley. He's very different as an athlete. He was a Bruce Feldman's freak list guy, big time measurables checking in, and the guy is completely rocked up. And everybody's like, every NFL player is jacked, and that's true to an extent. But Malachi Corley, like the guy is different. It just takes like watching him, and you're like, okay, this guy moves differently. He plays a little bit differently, and I think that if the Jets lean into it, he could be a guy that could be really, really fun out the gate. I'll give credit to Anthony Amico at Establish the Run for this one, but he made a Randall Cobb, like he could be like a Randall Cobb type player for Aaron Rodgers. I thought that was a really cool one just because of the familiarity, both from the state of Kentucky. That was kind of an interesting one.
I was actually going to bring up Randall Cobb because the thing that, obviously you love to hear if you're a Malachi Corley backer and you're making the ridiculous decision to draft him in round 2, as some people, myself, have. You love to hear this was Aaron Rodgers' favorite wide receiver in the draft. And it would make sense if he saw Randall Cobb in him, because he's basically kept Randall Cobb employed for the last 5 seasons just because he's Aaron Rodgers' favorite wide receiver. So if he could move into that role, the difference being is that he could catch the ball 5 yards from the line of scrimmage and do something afterwards. Like Randall Cobb used to. No disrespect at all to Randall Cobb. He had a great career with Rodgers early in Green Bay. I'll give another guy. I want to ask you, Kelly, about my argument for him, but Luke McCaffrey, getting some very good reports on him out of Washington. Obviously has the NFL pedigree, which I'm kind of a sucker for. And now we've got the Breakfast Club narrative with Jaden Daniels saying that he gets to the facility at 5:45 a.m. every day, and the only guy that's there with him is Luke McCaffrey. Am I a sucker for buying into this narrative after it worked so well with Cooper Kupp?
I don't think you're a sucker at all. There's definitely something to be said for receivers and quarterbacks building a rapport. I love the whole Breakfast Club narrative, and I don't think you can go wrong with an athletic family. The McCaffreys obviously have history. You have to root for them. And, a guy with a good work ethic, it has to win. It has to win, Heath.
Well, at least if it doesn't, you'd rather be pulling for that guy. We did have one response in the chat, and feel free to put your names out there if you've got a rookie sleeper you think we missed. Ryan Flournoy with the Dallas Cowboys. At the very least, Theo, there's opportunity, kind of like the New England situation. Like anybody could be the number 2 wide receiver behind CeeDee Lamb, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Tolbert's going to be interesting, sort of as like a post-hype guy. We were talking about him years ago. It sort of hasn't happened, but he did improve as the season moved along last year. Brandon Cooks is there, but yeah, there's a big kind of group of people at Player Profiler who are fans of Flournoy. Big-time athlete, Southeast Missouri State player, and despite his draft capital, like he does have a pathway where he could get on the field at some point during his rookie season. So we will see. We will see.
Kelly, I want to go back to the tight ends now, because I think that this class after Brock Bowers, pretty interesting. And if you looking at Dynasty League ADP, you've got tight end 2 Benson, who you were just talking about, is going right around pick 29 or 30. And then 4 picks later, Jatavian Sanders, who was selected by the Carolina Panthers. Then about 10 picks after that, we've got Theo Johnson, and then Eric All, and then Jared Wiley. So 6 tight ends there, and basically the top 50 picks in most rookie drafts. Do you have other than Senate, obviously, do you have a favorite out of that group? I have a really hard time. I go back and forth between Sanders and Johnson. Johnson being the elite athlete, and I'm not sure much else matters when you come into the NFL. In terms of upside. But man, I watched Sanders on film, and he was really struggled with consistency. But there are times when you're like, oh, that guy's clearly an NFL tight end. Look at him.
Right. Look at him. 6'6", 240 something pounds. Huge athletic man. And with the retirement of Darren Waller, obviously leaves an opening for him there. That's where I tend to lean towards Theo Johnson. Jatavian Sanders, I do love him too. I think it's almost more of an immediate draw, but I love that, Darren Waller's gone. We get that monkey off of our back because we were carrying him on our benches all season last year, hoping he was going to come back, but he's not. So we've got Theo Johnson filling in. And what about Cade Stover, though? He gets left out of the conversation. I think that there should be another little look at Cade Stover. CJ Stroud's no slouch.
Yeah, right. I think like the difference for him versus Johnson is obviously that Dalton Schultz is still there.
Right.
But I do think that Cade Stover, and I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, Theo, like I look at the Bellinger, Theo Johnson conversation. I think, man, if I had to bet on one guy leading tight ends in snap share this year, it's probably Bellinger. But if I had to bet on one guy actually mattering for fantasy football, it would be Theo Johnson. And to me, Stover falls more into that category of, yeah, at some point he's probably going to play a lot. I'm not sure he's ever going to score many fantasy points.
Stover's interesting. It could be looked at as sort of a longer term play, and you might end up with getting the best dynasty asset by taking Stover. Like, I know that the Texans GM, like Nick Cassiero, has praised Stover. I think internally the organization really likes Stover. And we did see Schultz miss time last year. Brevin Jordan had a few week period where he was a waiver wire like consideration. I think that the Theo Johnson versus Jatavian Sanders one is interesting. When after the NFL draft happened, the bet probably would have been on Sanders, but now Johnson has this immediate path. Bellinger, we've seen him. I think we can agree that he's sort of like a middling talent, nothing special. Johnson is a next level athlete. He caught some touchdowns at Penn State, not an incredible amount of production, but there is a pathway where he could be on the field a lot more than we think. He's incredibly cheap. Jatavian Sanders, though, they took him with the first pick in the 4th round. His teammates were pretty good, Heath. So
just a little bit.
Like his production before Adonai Mitchell was there, he had his most productive season. I believe it was 2022. And then 2023, it took a step back, but all of those guys were drafted, and those guys were drafted ahead of him with Worthy, with Adonai Mitchell. So Sanders should get an opportunity. Also, when you look at those two guys, Sanders is 21 years old. Theo Johnson's 23. So we kind of know a little bit more about what Theo Johnson is at this point. But I think they're both worth shots. I think that the tight end market after Benson is just sort of beat up, and you can take some shots here on those two players, and you might end up with a guy who starts for many years in the NFL. Now, how impactful they're going to be for our fantasy teams is a different story. I would bet on Jatavian Sanders probably. If I had to pick one for their entire career, it's probably Sanders. He was more productive in college. He's younger, and he was drafted earlier in the NFL draft and has less competition in Carolina. That would probably be my bet. But both, I think, are worth taking shots on.
Yeah, and I like when you get to the end of round 3 and especially in round 4, if any of those guys are there, I'm probably taking the tight end over the running back or the wide receiver. Where I kind of lost a little bit, and I'll go back to you on this, Theo, is like there were other quarterbacks drafted in the NFL draft besides Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. But do any of them actually matter? Drake May, obviously, too. But
I think that the only one that actually has some positive buzz right now and potentially has a pathway is Spencer Rattler, just because I think that there could be a point in time where New Orleans might want to see what they have in him. The early buzz is there. He's a little bit more than like the Aiden O'Connell level prospect, where he's a guy where he had the pedigree, he had the early production. This is a guy who was beat out by Caleb Williams, but before that, he was looked at as a guy who could go very early in the NFL draft. I think he's really the only one. That being said, I don't really care about having much of him on any of my dynasty rosters unless it was like the deepest format. You nailed it. The NFL told you the quarterbacks that they're into this year. They were all drafted in the 1st round. Those are the guys you want to really take shots on. But if you get an opportunity to get Spencer Rattler specifically in a deep dynasty format, want to see what happens there, he would be the one like day 3 guy that I would take a bet on.
And I think I'd rather just use that pick and see if I can trade it for Gardner Minshew or Sam Darnold or even Jacoby Brissett, guys that are probably going to start for a while this year. And maybe some contender gets desperate and will give me a little better pick mid-season. Kelly, I'll come back to you, and it doesn't have to be rapid fire here, but Theo, you can follow. Any other rookies outside of the top 30 that we haven't talked about yet that we need to talk about?
We've talked about so many, but one I've been thinking about because the Buffalo Bills have been on my mind a little bit lately, and thinking about Josh Allen, and he's losing his receivers left and right in trades. They've picked up Keon Coleman, who had a pretty poor performance in the combine, which caused him to fall. That's really unfortunate because the guy can catch. He's another one of these tall, athletic, really built guys who's going to catch the ball. And I think he's going to make an immediate impact if he can connect with Josh Allen.
Theo, any rookie sleepers left on your board here?
Well, I think that when you get to a point in the draft, there's going to be a pocket of running backs who sort of have a pathway towards viability. It's probably contingent viability, Heath. But that being said, there's a sort of an argument between Will Shipley and Kenneth Gainwell in Philly right now. I think it's Shipley all the way. I think we've seen what Gainwell is for 2 years. Shipley's a guy where I think when we get to August, it's sort of going to be apparent that he's the handcuff running back there. He's if Saquon Barkley were to miss time, I think Shipley could be a guy that could be in our lineup every week. Very good offensive line, great players around him. Obviously, Jalen Hurts and an offense we believe in. Same thing with Ray Davis. Ray Davis is like Latavius Murray, but much, much better if you want to kind of define his early role, where there were games last year where Lat Murray was cutting into the snap share of James Cook, getting opportunities. He just didn't really do anything because he's an old, dusty running back. Ray Davis was extremely productive in the SEC for multiple seasons, and he's sort of a like-for-like replacement for James Cook in what he can do as a pass catcher out of the backfield. So I like taking shots on some of these guys where they're contingent plays, but they're contingent plays in really, really good offenses. I'll throw Tyrone Tracy in that mix too. Certainly a downgrade on the offense, but less running back competition ahead of him. Devin Singletary, we've seen him. He's a fine player. He's been an RB3, been a low-end RB2, never been a guy who's just been able to absorb a ton of volume in any season in his career. So I think Tyrone Tracy, if he can beat out Eric Gray, that's a guy where athletically really gifted. Think of like Antonio Gibson style athlete and a former wide receiver that can catch passes out of the backfield. He was played at Iowa as a wide receiver, transfers to Purdue, switches to running back, and athletically he's right there. Eric Gray is going to be a little bit annoying. I think the team kind of likes him, but if Tracy can beat out Gray, I want a lot of Tyrone Tracy.
And see, I think this might be a situation where Tracy can beat out Gray for passing downs pretty quickly. But if Devin Singletary goes away, I'd still bet on Eric Gray being the guy that handles the 15 carries a game. And Tracy maybe does some more explosive stuff. It's just, man, do I want a part-time running back in a Daniel Jones offense? It's maybe.
They're both cheap.
Right.
I think Eric Gray, you could throw Eric Gray sort of as a unknown upside guy. Eric Gray also was a very good pass catcher. That was sort of his MO coming out. They're kind of it's weird. It's really weird. They're kind of opposite athletes. Gray was like a really slow 40 type player. I think that's how the Giants got him for so cheap. And Tracy on the other side is this like next level athlete. So I think having a little bit of Eric Gray and Tyrone Tracy, you might end up getting some starts this year if Singletary can't hold up.
I absolutely love that idea. And I love your really smooth, like you're a pro's pro, because that's what we're going to talk about after the break. Some veteran buys. Yeah, we'll talk about the old guys that contenders can buy, but also some of those second and third year players like an Eric Gray that you can get for almost nothing because they've done almost nothing.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
Okay, so we are switching gears. We're out of the rookie draft, or maybe we're still in the rookie draft, and we're in the later rounds, and we're thinking, what veterans can we trade for? Because we're contenders. We want to win a title this year. Kelly, you have any cheap aging veterans that you'd like to put on those contending rosters? Are going to be better than everybody thinks they're going to this year?
I happened to write about one this week. I'm going to go with Gus Edwards. I know he's out with an undisclosed injury, but there's not a whole lot going on over there without him. The Chargers have their rookie, Kamani Vidal. They have J.K. Dobbins, but come on, the man is made of glass. We have not seen much out of him. I think Gus Edwards is going to be one you're going to be able to choose for your win now. He's gonna power through. He's experienced. Man, he was averaging 11 fantasy points per game last year. So I think that this injury is gonna bump him even further down, but it's not gonna stop him. He's going to be back from camp, from everything we're hearing.
Absolutely, somebody you can go get with a round 3 rookie pick, and we love the offense for running backs. Like Greg Roman's going to design a very good and efficient run offense.
Yeah.
I've been, kind of lamenting this whole coaching staff for Justin Herbert and the way they took away all of his weapons, and now they're going to take away all of his pass attempts. But I do think, like, if you're targeting, and I would throw Dobbins in that category as well. You were right. He's not been able to stay healthy, but he's also extremely cheap because of that. And I have a hard time letting go of those guys that I liked when they were coming out. Theo, who's your favorite veteran cheap buy?
I like where Kelly's mind was at on the Gus one because of the sort of the uncertainty in the backfield there too. I think makes him even cheaper. And we've seen like he could just do what he did last year, give you RB26 production, and all of a sudden that can be helpful in bye weeks and for running back depth. I like kicking the tires right now on DeAndre Hopkins. I think DeAndre Hopkins is super interesting because you see him going off the board at wide receiver 41 on Underdog. This is the cheapest he's been in best ball drafts for a while. He was very good last year, very effective in games. You think about that offense wasn't passing a lot, and he still was giving you over 1,000 yards receiving, over 70 catches, and had some spike weeks mixed in despite the offense's struggles. Now we have a stylistic change where everything that they're saying under Callahan is that they're going to pass the ball a ton. D-Hops is a guy where if I want to get a 1 year out of a guy, he's cheap enough that I could kick the tires on like a pair of low picks, and also he's an easy guy to kind of gauge in Dynasty, because if the person in your league is rostering D-Hops and they don't have a really good roster, they're going to take the picks. He's a difficult one to hold. I mean, people don't want to hold on to 33-year-old wide receivers, but I think you could get a season out of D-Hops where he starts every single game for you, and he's cheaper than any wide receiver with his sort of production outlook right now in Dynasty trades. So I like kicking the tires on D-Hops, a guy who's always had production for us, but certain managers just don't know what to do with because of how old he is.
How do you view that receiving core with Calvin Ridley coming over from Jacksonville, with Tyler Boyd coming along with Callahan from Cincinnati? Like, how do you think they're going to chop up the targets there between those three guys?
I actually think it's going to be a team that could kind of punch above their weight in certainly on what we're seeing on Underdog and in early redraft ADPs. Now, do they have a league winning potential out of any of those guys? I don't think so, but I do think that D-Hops and Calvin Ridley, when you're looking at dynasty startups, they're both going pretty cheaply compared to what their production was last year. Ridley was wide receiver 18 overall after missing time the year before, gets a huge contract, and the dynasty community doesn't really want anything to do with him. But whatever you think about Ridley, D-Hops is just much cheaper. He's older. He's like 4 years older than Ridley. And he's sort of being looked at as a guy who's being sort of pushed aside by this new free agent. I'm fine having some Ridley on my dynasty rosters. Again, D-Hops is super cheap. Ridley might have a longer window, especially because of that contract, but I think they're both fine. I think that the Offense is ascending. Stylistically, they're going to change a ton. And I'll push that to the running back spot too, Heath. I think those running backs are both going to catch a lot of balls. I think this is going to be a predictable offense. Tyler Boyd, I don't know. I think Tyler Boyd is more like a familiarity with the coach. He's going to do what Tyler Boyd always does, where he'll have a couple of games here and there where he takes advantage of a matchup and has a final line. You're never going to start him unless one of those two wide receivers goes down. But I'm into kind of both those guys, I think, which is kind of weird. I didn't think I'd be, advocating for trading for Tennessee Titans wide receivers, but they're so cheap. You might be able to get usage out of them this season. So,
well, that's one of the things I was tweeting through it last night, trying to pass time until the Celtics won the championship. And I was talking about how I actually have Will Levis projected for better passing fantasy production this season than Trevor Lawrence had last season. And part of that's just because Trevor Lawrence's passing production last season was not good. The touchdown rate was bad. The yardage total wasn't that good, but also because what you said, like, I think this Titans pass offense is just going to be better than people think it's going to be. I've got a wide receiver that I'm buying that's actually 4 years younger than Hopkins, and looking at current June Dynasty League football ADP is going in round 13 of startup drafts, wide receiver 57. It's Cortland Sutton.
that's a really good one.
Yeah, it just nobody wants to view him as even a number 3 for this season. And he seems to me to be the clear number 1 on the Denver Broncos. They got rid of Jerry Jeudy. We had Jacob Gibbs on the show last week, I believe, talking about how much better Sutton's been in terms of his per route data when Jerry Jeudy's not been on the field. And that, in fairness, there's a pretty large sample size of Jerry Jeudy not being on the field with Cortland Sutton in Denver. I am a little bit concerned that Bo Nix doesn't fit Sutton's skill set quite as well as Russell Wilson did, but I do think that Bo Nix fits what Sean Payton wants to do a lot better than Russell Wilson did. So I think this offense is just a little bit better than it was last year in terms of passing efficiency, and Sutton could be a guy that's seeing 130 targets this season.
Targets are targets. At the end of the day, there's so many question marks surrounding him. We look at Marvin Mims as a guy that we're hoping can get a bigger opportunity this year. There's a huge Troy Franklin, contingent in Dynasty that are betting on him, but he's still a 4th round pick. And Cortland Sutton last year had 10 touchdown grabs. The year before, he had 109 targets. I think that this year, that 109 targets is something I would probably bet on. I think he's a plus 100 target guy and he's a guy who's clearly going to get usage early. One of those wide receivers could kind of cut into it in the second half of the year, but I like that one a lot, Heath. And I think if Denver doesn't pay Cortland Sutton, then somebody is going to. He might end up in a better situation, kind of like a Hollywood Brown this year, where Hollywood Brown lands with Mahomes. I think that's a really, really good call and super cheap.
Okay, Kelly, we're going to stay with the veterans, but we're going to stretch the term of what veteran means, because I want to talk about some of these second and third year players. When you're trying to trade cheap rookie picks to acquire players who are already in the NFL, it's not always about a contender going after a DeAndre Hopkins or a Cortland Sutton. Sometimes it's about going after those second and third year players you still believe in, even though they've not really done anything yet. Do you have one of those for us?
I do have one of those, but before, can I just back up 1 second? Because both of you said something super relevant to me, and I was thinking about, Heath, what you said about Will Levis having a better year, 100%. And Theo, what you're saying about DeAndre Hopkins, 100%. The two of them really worked well together. I feel like Will Levis relied a lot on the veteran status of DeAndre Hopkins, the trust, knowing he's going to catch the ball. And now he's going to get that in all of these other weapons that he's receiving, Calvin Ridley. So yeah, it's absolutely going to be a good year for Will Levis and those receivers. So I just wanted to touch on that because good merging there. But when we're talking about second year, third year, here I go again, being a homer. He had some injury last year, but Michael Wilson is being completely overlooked. There is a little bit of a rise. The train is starting to take off. He's his best hype man, I must say. But if you had gotten the opportunity to see Michael Wilson in camp preseason, and then the way he performed at the end of the season with Kyler back in the saddle, Michael Wilson should not be slept on. He is another one of these very tall receivers. His hands seem like Velcro to me. He can catch just about anything from any quarterback. His longest catch of the year was 69 yards from Josh Dobbs. So it doesn't even matter if Kyler is there leading the way. Michael Wilson's going to catch it.
Absolutely. I love that one. I love the talent with Wilson, and I think like Marvin Harrison's going to make things easier on him.
Yeah.
I think the injury problems he battled last year, that's something that kind of followed him through college. We need to see him stay healthy and play 16 or so games this year. Theo, who are you still believing in?
I think Kendre Miller is very interesting right now. Kendre Miller is going off the board as running back 43 on Underdog. This was a guy where if he would have just gone back to TCU, I think he'd probably be a guy that would have been a day 2 pick this year in the NFL draft. And it's almost like the kind of like the speed bump last year hurt him with dynasty managers. I think there's people that are still kind of willing to re-roll their Kendre Miller pick and get a rookie pick for him. But there's a pathway here where Alvin Kamara is older. Alvin Kamara was very good last year, but this is a team that's kind of screaming out for another running back who can absorb weekly volume. Kendre Miller, if Kamara was going to miss time, would have a very high ceiling because he can also catch the ball. And this is a guy that we liked coming out of college. So I think he's sort of a post-type guy. He's not going to be dirt cheap, but he's a guy that probably costs you a little bit less than you would have had to pay before he played an NFL down. Charbonnet is an interesting one as well, Heath, where I think it's sort of like the market is treating him like a solid handcuff, but I think he could be a little bit more than that. Ken Walker, this is a guy with a new coaching staff. We don't know if Charbonnet is going to cut in a little bit more. Charbonnet has pass catching ability that I think is better than Ken Walker and potentially could be better around the goal line. So this could be a little bit more of a split with Charbonnet getting the high value touches. And if you want to go super cheap, Roschon Johnson is RB60 now on Underdog. DeAndre Swift was signed. He's going to get the first crack at it. Khalil Herbert is still there, certainly a talented player. But if you're looking for a like-for-like replacement for what Swift can do, I think Roschon is more like that. Roschon had some games last year where he caught the ball very well. And I think that the market is sort of like forgetting Roschon Johnson. I think you could offer a third-round rookie pick and get Roschon from some managers. And I think by the end of the day, if that Bears offense is going to take a big step forward, Roschon can end up being a valuable handcuff. And, you never know when these running backs switch teams, when sometimes it doesn't fit well. Last year with Miles Sanders. So I'm kind of in on DeAndre Swift this year, but if it falls apart, I would bet on Roschon, not Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, I can tell Kelly's got something to say, and so I'm gonna come right to you, Kelly. I just want to say first, like, if you thought I was overweight on Malachi Corley, you should see where I've got Zach Charbonnet ranked in Dynasty, because I absolutely love him. And but it's not really an anti-Ken Walker thing, because I love Ken Walker's spike weeks and the big plays he makes. How do you view that Seattle situation? Was Zach Charbonnet the one you wanted to talk about, Kelly?
I really do like Zach Charbonnet. I think it just wasn't his time. So he just needed time. That's a stacked room over there. So he's going to get his time to shine. I think it's a great pick. But I wanted to ask you both, what do you think about Rico Dowdle? I cannot get him out of my head. I feel like, man, I relied on the guy on waivers quite a few times last season, and now he's there with this injury-prone Ezekiel Elliott, who we still all obviously love and adore. Where does Rico Dowdle fit in here? Is he part of this conversation?
I don't know, first off, that everybody still loves and adores Ezekiel Elliott. Certainly Tony Pollard managers did not 2 years ago, and I'm not sure Ramondre Stevenson managers did last year. I actually have, and I'm probably a little bit low, like looking at this on Kendre Miller, but I've got Kendre Miller at RB48, Rico Dowdle at RB49, Roschon Johnson at RB50. So it's those three guys are all kind of in the same range. I think the other two, Miller and Johnson, have a lot more potential upside. but it's much easier for me, Theo, to see Rico Dowdle being a high-end flex, low-end RB2 like very early this season.
Yeah, I mean, right now, Zeke Elliott is RB 39 on Underdog,
Yeah.
and Dowdle's sitting there at RB 44. So if we're going to use kind of the best ball market to show us kind of
Right.
where those guys are at, neither one costs anything. At the end of the day, though, that organization for Zeke to come back there, it's gonna take a Zeke injury. They're gonna give Zeke this opportunity. Zeke was more effective than I think some people give credit to last year. Had 230 touches on New England. I just think they're going to give Zeke the ball around the goal line. That's sort of like for Rico Dowdle to be really effective in this offense, we're going to need him to earn that goal line role and sort of be the touchdown guy. But I mean, Kelly, you kind of nailed it. It's a contingent play. If Zeke goes down, Dowdle's cheap. And in Dynasty, Dowdle's really cheap because I don't think anybody views him as some sort of a long-term guy at all. This is sort of a stopgap offense for both of these guys. And everybody wanted them to just draft Jonathan Brooks in the NFL draft, Heath. So I think it's fine. Have a little bit of Rico Dowdle, but I do think it's a contingent play, not a he's going to beat out Zeke play.
As long as Jerry Jones has not been like tied up and taken away from the decision making, I think that's probably accurate. Jerry Jones loves it. He is the guy, Kelly, who loves him some Ezekiel Elliott still. You know what, Kelly, Theo, this was awesome stuff. I really appreciate you guys coming on with me today, talking about Dynasty Sleepers. Kelly, just remind everybody where they can find your work. Tell them what you've got coming up.
Yeah, be sure to go check out playerprofiler.com. We'll have DFS coming up. If you follow any of my DFS for Player Profiler last season, then you probably made some money. So I hope you stick with us again this season. Theo's been working super hard on the draft kit. There's a ton of great information in there. And I didn't mention the Sick podcast with Kelly Singh, part of the Sick Podcast Network, where we're talking about Arizona Cardinals every week.
Theo, what's coming up for you?
You can find me every week on Dynasty Life, press coverage, First Class Fantasy, Sonic Truth. We're putting out a bunch of shows. YouTube, we just crossed 25,000 YouTube subscribers, which we're really excited about at Player Profiler. You can find all my written work at playerprofiler.com. Shout out to Kelly. She submitted her entry to our draft kit. That's coming up. We have a lot of video entries as well as, a lot of team breakdowns and our top 250 rankings. Get my rankings, Billy Muzio's rankings, Bradley Stalder's rankings, all in one spot. But yeah, this is a lot of fun. And look for Heath to pop into Dynasty Life sometime soon.
Very, very soon. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Harry. Thank you to everybody who was active in the YouTube chat here today. Thanks to everybody listening on the podcast. We will be back on Friday with a startup mock draft. We will talk to you on Friday.